Evelyn Brooks had never imagined that the worst moment of her life would begin right after she buried her husband under the freezing wind of a coastal cemetery in the state of Oregon. Dorothy Hale, her mother-in-law, stood right behind the freshly placed headstone, holding a thick envelope in her hand, her eyes cold like metal. Inside that envelope was not a message of condolence, but a command forcing Evelyn to choose between her own survival and the unborn child growing inside her body. Evelyn Brooks, 30 years old, an elementary school teacher, 5 months pregnant, could still feel the life of her baby every time she placed her hand on her stomach. But at that moment, in the middle of a cemetery filled with wet earth and white chrysanthemums, she was forced into an unimaginable situation. Her husband, Mason Brooks, had just been buried, and his mother was demanding that she erase everything that remained of him. Dorothy did not need to say much. She was the kind of person who gave orders instead of explanations. Her voice was calm but sharp like a thin blade, each word shaped by power and control. She said Evelyn was not capable of raising a child, that Mason was dead, and everything now belonged to the past. The baby inside her was treated as a mistake that needed to be handled quickly and quietly. Evelyn stood still, feeling as if the ground beneath her feet was splitting apart. She did not cry. She did not speak. She only felt her heart pounding so hard it hurt inside her chest. She looked at the envelope in Dorothy's hand, then at her cold expression, and unconsciously placed her hand on her stomach as if it was the only remaining form of protection she had left. Behind Dorothy, a black car was parked not far away. Inside the car was Lily, Mason's daughter from his first marriage, a 6-year-old girl who had called Evelyn Mom for the past 3 years. Lily was holding her stuffed toy tightly, her small face pressed against the window, her eyes filled with fear even though she did not fully understand what was happening. She only knew that the world she had always known was being taken away piece by piece. Dorothy turned her back on Lily and told her in a voice completely devoid of warmth to get into the car. There was no explanation, no comfort, only a decision. Evelyn stepped forward, but Dorothy stopped her with a sentence colder than the coastal wind, saying this was no longer her family. Those words were not just an insult, they were a verdict. Evelyn suddenly realized that everything she had believed in for the past 3 years was being erased within minutes. The house she cleaned every morning, the dining table she prepared dinner on, the room she painted yellow for the future of the child in her womb, all of it suddenly felt foreign, as if it had never belonged to her at all. Dorothy spoke about documents, ownership rights, and a loan Mason had taken from her many years ago. Each sentence cut deeper into Evelyn's sense of reality. The house was not in her name, the car did not belong to her. Even her place in this family had never been legally recognized. In that moment, Evelyn was no longer the wife who had just lost her husband. She became an outsider, pushed out of a story she had believed she was the main character of. But the most painful part was not the property or the paperwork, it was Lily. The child was being taken away right in front of her eyes. When the car began to move, Lily turned her head back. Her lips moved as if calling out, "Mom." The sound did not reach the outside, but it pierced Evelyn's heart like a crack that could never be repaired. Evelyn ran after the car, but the doors were already locked. Dorothy sat inside without looking at her anymore, as if she had never existed. The vehicle drove away, leaving behind a woman standing alone in the cemetery, her hands trembling, her breath broken, and a void that could not be filled. The ocean wind blew through, cold and sharp. Evelyn stood there for a long time until her body could no longer hold itself up. Inside her womb, the baby moved slightly, as if reminding her that she still had something left to hold on to. But even that was not enough to cover the truth slowly forming in her mind. This was not a simple family dispute. This was a setup that had begun long before Mason was buried, and Evelyn did not yet know that her husband's death might not be the end. It might only be the beginning of a much larger secret, where family, power, and betrayal were intertwined like a trap that had already been laid out long ago. Evelyn Brooks returned to the coastal house in Cannon Beach in a state where she could barely feel time anymore. Only a few hours earlier, she had been standing in a cemetery watching her husband's coffin being lowered into the ground. But the moment she stepped through the gate of the house, an unusual silence made her stop immediately. The house that once belonged to Mason Brooks now felt like a completely unfamiliar space. The lights in the living room were still on, but there was no warmth in them anymore. On the porch, neatly stacked cardboard boxes stood as if someone had already decided to erase the traces of her old life for her. And then she saw the familiar black car parked right at the entrance. Dorothy Hale was already there. No greeting, no explanation. Only her presence, like someone who had long since secured complete control. A woman rearranging another person's life without asking for permission. Evelyn quickly stepped inside, her breathing heavy, but what she saw made her freeze. Mason's photographs had been taken down, the wardrobe doors were thrown open. Lily's belongings were carefully packed, small dresses, toys she had grown up with, all placed inside cardboard boxes. A housekeeper was carrying a pink suitcase down the stairs, and then Evelyn heard crying. Not an adult's crying. It was the broken, helpless voice of a child. Lily, the little girl, was standing by the car door, both hands pressed against the window, her red eyes staring at Evelyn as if begging for help. Her lips moved, calling out Mom, but the door was locked from the inside. In that moment, time felt like it had been crushed. Evelyn ran forward, her hands slamming against the car window, but the door did not open. There was no response. Dorothy sat inside calmly, as if this were nothing more than a procedure already planned in advance. She lowered the window just slightly, enough for her cold voice to reach outside. "Do not make a scene, Evelyn. It will not change anything. You no longer have any authority over this child." Evelyn went silent. That sentence was not just a statement. It was a verdict being delivered in her own front yard. The child who had called her mom, who had slept in her arms for 3 years, was being erased from her life with a single sentence. She tried to keep her voice from breaking. "She is my daughter. I raised her. You cannot just come here and take her away." But Dorothy did not move. Her eyes were sharper now, colder, as if all emotion had been removed long ago. "I can. And I already have. You should be worried about yourself, Evelyn, especially the baby in your womb." A cold wave ran down Evelyn's spine. Her stomach tightened slightly, as if the baby inside her could also sense danger. She placed her hand on her belly and took a step back, but everything around her felt like it was collapsing. Dorothy signaled to the driver. The engine started. Lily began to panic, banging her hands against the glass, calling out for her mother repeatedly, but her voice was slowly swallowed by the sound of the engine. Evelyn ran after the car, her feet slipping on the wet gravel. But the distance between her and the child kept growing, and then within seconds, the car turned off the road in front of the house and disappeared behind the coastal pine trees. Evelyn was left standing in the yard, alone. The ocean wind blew harder, cutting through her skin with cold precision. She stood there for a long time, not crying, not speaking, only feeling every piece of her life being pulled out of her hands. The house behind her no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a reclaimed possession. She walked back inside in a dazed state. Mason's scent was still lingering on the coat hanging by the door. The familiar smell made her freeze, her heart tightening painfully. She slid down onto the wooden floor at the entrance, holding her stomach, trying to keep her breathing from breaking apart. That night, she did not sleep. She searched every drawer, every file, every box in Mason's office, not out of hope, but out of a desperate instinct that something had to remain. A clue. An explanation. And then she found it. A drawer with a false bottom. Beneath it was an old phone that did not belong to the Mason she knew. A simple black phone, fully charged. Next to it was a handwritten business card. Dr. Adrian Wells, Harbor Medical Unit. If anything happens, find him. Trust him. No further explanation. Evelyn sat frozen for a long time. Strange gaps began forming in her mind. Mason was not just an engineer. Something had been hidden, something larger than the death she had witnessed. Outside the window, the coastal wind kept howling. But for the first time since the funeral, Evelyn no longer felt only loss. She began to feel that something was being concealed, and it was directly connected to her husband's death. Evelyn Brooks did not return to her old life after the long night without sleep in the coastal house. Instead, she began living in a state where everything around her felt blurred, as if the world was hiding something right in front of her eyes. In her hand was the old phone she had found in Mason's hidden drawer, along with the business card bearing the name of Dr. Adrian Wells. She did not know whether she was searching for answers or slowly stepping into another trap. The next morning, Evelyn left the house before dawn. Cold wind still struck her face as she boarded the bus heading toward the city center. The only question in her mind was who Mason Brooks really was. But when she arrived, the answer had not even appeared before another blow hit her. Her car was gone from the parking lot. A paper stuck on the window stated that the vehicle had been repossessed under lawful ownership rights. The name on the documents was not hers, it was Dorothy Hale. Evelyn stood still in the cold parking area. No anger, no panic. Only a hollow feeling slowly spreading through her thoughts, like water soaking into everything. She walked to the law office recommended by her friend. Patricia Morales, the lawyer, was a middle-aged woman with a calm voice and eyes that always seemed to read the ending of every story in advance. She listened as Evelyn told everything, from the funeral, the envelope of money, to losing her home and her connection with Lily. No one interrupted her. When Evelyn finished, the room fell into silence for several long seconds. Patricia set her pen down. The truth is, you are in a very weak legal position. If the house and the car are under your mother-in-law's name, she has the right to take them back. The law does not side with emotion. That sentence made Evelyn slightly clench her hands. But Lily, I have raised that child for 3 years. She calls me Mom. Patricia nodded slightly, as if that was the only part that still mattered. You can file for temporary custody, but this will be a long battle. And your mother-in-law has money. A lot of money. Evelyn stayed silent. She understood that better than anyone, but what she could not let go of was not property. It was the feeling of being erased from a child's life. When she left the law office, snow began to fall lightly. Seattle felt colder than usual, as if every road led to emptiness. She called Mason's company. After nearly an hour on hold, a woman answered with unusual caution. Not the usual sympathy, but avoidance. There are some issues related to Mason Brooks' file. The beneficiary information is currently under review. Evelyn froze. Under review by whom? The answer was unclear. Only one recommendation was given. She should speak to a lawyer. The call ended. Evelyn stood on the busy sidewalk, but it felt like she was separated from the world. Everything around her kept moving, but she did not. In her bag, the secret phone was still there. She took it out. Her finger paused on the screen for several seconds. Then she pressed call. The phone rang 3 times. A woman answered first, but immediately transferred the call. Then, a man's voice came through. Dr. Adrian Wells speaking. At that moment, Evelyn felt her heart tighten. I am Evelyn Brooks. I am calling because of Mason Brooks. There was a long silence on the other end. Not surprise, but the kind of silence of someone who had been waiting for this call for a long time. Finally, he said a single sentence that shifted Evelyn's entire world off its axis. I know, and I need you to come see me immediately. No explanation. No additional words. Only an address was given. Harbor Medical Unit. Evelyn stood still, holding the phone tightly. She did not know whether she was walking toward the truth or stepping deeper into a hidden network she could never have imagined. But for the first time since Mason was buried, she felt something else existing behind all her losses. Not coincidence, not accident, a plan. And she had just stepped into its first part. Evelyn Brooks did not sleep all night before stepping into Harbor Medical Unit. She sat in a temporary rented room on the outskirts of Seattle, her hand resting on Mason's old phone, the dim screen light reflecting onto her exhausted face. Everything that had happened since Mason's burial no longer felt like a normal life. It felt like a series of layers being peeled back one by one, revealing something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The next morning, Evelyn left in silence. No tears, no panic, only a strange feeling, like standing in front of a door she already knew she could never walk back through. Harbor Medical Unit stood isolated from residential areas, a low building with dark-tinted glass and an unsettling silence. When Evelyn entered, she was immediately guided to a sealed room. No long procedures, no waiting, everything felt as if they had already known she would come. The door opened. Dr. Adrian Wells was standing there. He did not speak immediately. He looked at her for a few seconds, as if confirming something he had been waiting a long time for. Then he motioned for her to sit down. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "I know you think Mason is dead." Her heart tightened. "He is not dead," she asked. Dr. Wells placed a folder on the table. His voice lowered. "No. Mason Brooks is alive. But his death was staged." In that moment, Evelyn's world split in two. She could not breathe for several seconds. Every memory of the funeral, the coffin, the cold soil, and Dorothy's declaration crashed into each other like a violent wave. He continued, steady but heavy. Mason discovered an illegal financial network inside the defense company he worked for. Money was being moved through layers of shell companies. There were signs of large-scale money laundering tied to government contracts. Evelyn shook her head slightly, as if her mind refused to accept it. "And my mother-in-law," she said. Dr. Wells paused. "Dorothy Hale does not just know about it, she is part of it." The air in the room felt frozen. He explained that Mason had begun to be followed, strange cars appearing near the house, phone lines being tapped, and signs that his life was no longer safe. The FBI had intervened. They made an extreme decision: to fake Mason's death in order to protect him and gain time to collect evidence. Evelyn clenched her hands tightly. "Then who was in the coffin?" she asked. "A nameless man," Dr. Wells said. "No family, records altered, identity reconstructed." The answer almost made her laugh, but no sound came out. "And me? And Lily?" Evelyn whispered. Dr. Wells looked at her with heavy eyes. "They could not tell you. If you knew, Dorothy would have known as well. The entire operation would have collapsed. They needed your reaction to be natural. They needed everyone to believe Mason was truly dead." Evelyn lowered her head. Her shoulders trembled, not from crying, but from the realization that everything she believed to be real was being rewritten. Dr. Wells continued, slower now. "Dorothy is not just a wealthy family member. She is directly connected to the money flow. We believe she discovered Mason's investigation and acted before he could fully report it." Evelyn looked up. "So she took my house, my car, my child? It was all part of a plan," she asked. Dr. Wells did not answer immediately, but the silence was enough. "Partly," he said. "She is trying to control everything connected to Mason. And Lily is a key piece." That sentence made Evelyn go cold. Lily was no longer just a child caught in a custody battle. She had become part of a conflict Evelyn had never known existed. Dr. Wells pushed an envelope toward her. Inside was a handwritten letter from Mason. The familiar handwriting made her hands tremble the moment she touched the paper. "Evelyn, if you are reading this, I know you will hate me. But I had no choice. If you are seeing this, everything has gone further than I can control. Trust Dr. Wells, protect Lily, and wait for me." Evelyn dropped the letter. Tears finally fell, but not from simple grief. It was a mixture of anger, fear, and something like resistance slowly rising inside her. "I want to see him," she said. Dr. Wells shook his head. "Not yet. If you return too soon, Dorothy will know, and everything will collapse." Evelyn stood up. The chair scraped softly behind her. "Then what am I supposed to do?" she asked. "Stay safe. And wait for the signal." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out. Outside, Seattle was still drizzling. But inside her mind, everything had completely changed. Mason was not dead. Dorothy was not just a mother-in-law, and she was no longer a woman who had everything taken from her. She was standing at the center of a secret powerful enough to bring down an entire system. And for the first time since the funeral, Evelyn was no longer only surviving. She was becoming part of the fight.